It has been called the cradle of civilization, Mashriq, the Fertile Crescent, a place of deep complexity, of splendor and beauty, and of conflict and uncertainty. How to unravel this diverse and dynamic region. Today, four American college students will cover what they have learned so far about the modern Middle East.
To begin, let's cover some of the different materials that we've used in class thus far. The first and arguably most used being our textbook for this semester, A History of the Modern Middle East by William Cleveland and Martin Bunton. Alongside with our textbook, we have been given personal maps of the modern Middle East and major cities throughout. We've also used one primary source, that being The Mother of Two Springs, a poem given to us on the first day of class. We've also covered our ground rules, or the three C's as Dr. Marcus calls it, over proper discussion. And then we've also used a PBS documentary as well as a couple of videos from different providers, one being Vox.
Orientalism is defined as the westernized view of the Eastern world. On the first day of class, Dr. Marcus asked us what we thought of when we thought about the Middle East, to give us some perspective on its impact. We also, in the first week, we went over the poem The Mother of Two Springs, which covers, in the first paragraph, the assumption that everyone in Iraq spoke Chaldean, like all the Christian villages outside of Mosul.
Along with deconstructing some of our westernized views of the Middle East using primary sources such as the Mother of Two Springs, we have also discussed concepts such as historical contingency, that being the idea that history is not inevitable and rather is influenced and shaped by many different factors. It functions as a framework, and we have used it for discussion throughout class to better understand how changes occurred over time and to try and put ourselves in the shoes of those we are discussing. Some of the different questions that we have discussed over Orientalism and historical contingency have been: what if the Hashemite had survived the coup of 1958 in Iraq? Or what if Qasim's government had stuck solely with communists or had relied more on the international community?
The landed elites once held most of the power under the Ottomans, the British, and the monarchy. They owned huge estates and used their control to dominate politics and social society. As Iraq began to modernize, the middle class, made up of teachers, professionals, and reformers, started pushing for change. They wanted land reform and better opportunities, often standing between the rich elites and the working poor. The laboring class, like farmers and city workers, didn't have much individual power, but together they made their voices heard through strikes and unions, forcing the state to pay attention at least a little. Then, after the 1958 revolution, state elites like the military and Ba'ath party leaders took over. They controlled the country's oil, land, and the government, becoming the new centers of wealth and influence. Finally, the commercial class, Iraq's merchants and traders, helped connect the economies to the wider world, but their success often depended on how closely they worked with those in power. In the end, Iraq's story shows how power shifted from landowners to the state and how every class played a role in shaping the nation's modern identity. Iraq's modern history society was really divided by who had land, wealth, and power. The landed elites owned huge estates and controlled much of the farmland, especially in most fertile areas. The middle class included small landowners, shopkeepers, and professionals. They weren't super rich, but they pushed for reform and played a big role in politics. The laborers worked tough jobs in construction, oil, and transportation. They were the working backbone of the country, but often didn't earn much. The state elites, especially military officers and top officials, held the most power. One key figure was Abdul Karim Qasim, who led the 1958 revolution, overthrew the monarchy, and started land reforms that took property from big landlords and gave it to peasants. Then there was the commercial class, merchants and traders who helped connect Iraq to global markets. Altogether, these groups show how struggles over land and power really shaped Iraq's modern history.
A common thread that has run through our studies has been the role played by elites and commoners in the Arab world, as well as the relationship between urban and agrarian populations. For example, in 1920, rural Iraq was dominated by tribal confederations, which operated with relative freedom and autonomy because Ottoman presence had traditionally been headquartered in city centers. That year, the tribes of the Euphrates rebelled against British rule, and though the uprising was put down, it became a national symbol of defiance against foreign rule. An example of the role of elites in Iraq would be the coterie of Sunni officials who governed Iraq during the period following the death of the popular and unifying King Faisal. This cadre of bickering Sunni leaders used their office to amass personal wealth and ultimately caused distrust of the government among the commoners.
Anti-colonial nationalism. After the collapse of the Ottoman Empire following World War I, Britain and France divided the territory into mandated states through the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which we were shown a diagram of in class. The borders that were created by the mandates created a lot of confusion and resentment, since with the new borders, people started to question their own identities. The resentment also led to a rise in parties with pan-Arab values, such in states such as Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, that led to state-centered nationalism with the goal in mind of ending British and French influence.
As mentioned by Lucia, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire left power vacuums in many of the states discussed throughout class. Governments formed and fell with independence being allowed mainly through treaties or mandates in which political leaders, such as the monarchs of Iraq, were given power and influence through foreign entities like Britain and France. Revolutionary ideas clashed with conservative mindsets, and governments were put under immense pressure. The consistent upheaval and changing of government institutions has affected the Middle East much like anywhere else, and its lasting impacts have lasted, as we have discussed in class many times, well up into the latter half of the 20th century. For Iraq, after the violent ending of the monarchy in 1958, this political vacuum persisted with the rise and fall of Baathism and the Arab regime.
One concept that has frequently cropped up in our studies has been the various efforts to form a unified identity among Arabs. In 1958, Nasser made this ambition a political reality with the advent of the United Arab Republic, which amalgamated Egypt and Syria into a single sovereign state. The union would not last long. Egyptian hegemony over the partnership would induce Syria to secede from the UAR in 1961. Although the project did not bear fruit, it certified Egypt as a leading presence in the pan-Arab movement. In Iraq, the differing attitudes on pan-Arab nationalism sometimes have delineated themselves along religious and ethnic lines. Shia Muslims, for example, largely opposed the mid-century pan-Arab fervor, believing that, as a majority in Iraq but a minority in the Arab world, a pan-Arab confederation would naturally result in discrimination against them. Iraq's Kurds, though Sunni Muslims, also opposed pan-Arabism, fearing that it would dilute their political power and cut short any hope of a Kurdish state. King Faisal once said, "God gave man 2 ears and 1 tongue, so we could listen twice as much as we talk." We look forward to learning with and learning from our Iraqi colleagues, and we will try to listen twice as much as we talk.